Wow. Bruins lose 4-3 in Game 7 in overtime in the most heartbreaking way possible, I think is the best way to put it. People are already in. People have been in, so people can trickle in as this goes along. I imagine we'll be going a while here. Um, Carl, I mean, just a wild swing of emotions in the game, a wild swing of emotions in the series. I mean, what are you thinking right now?
No, I think the game was destined to go to overtime. I think that the Bruins were who they were all series, which was a team that lacked urgency and continued to turn pucks over. Probably got outplayed in 6 of 7 of the games, and not the way that, right? Like if all things are, if we're looking at all things, right? Like it looks like it's Krejci and Bergeron's last game, not the way that you would want them to go out. But even in that overtime, right? Like careless with pucks, turnovers, lack of urgency in the defensive zone, and you lose the game 4-3. So for me, like, what am I thinking right now, Evan? I think the better team won. Really, like,
Yes.
for the course of the series, I'm not gonna sit here and if you walk through each player, right? Like the Bruins have the better roster. Like Don Sweeney did a great job at the deadline acquiring a team that was capable of winning the Stanley Cup. But the Panthers, for a large portion of the series, were the far better team, and they deserved to win, and they won.
I think this, you saw it in overtime, you saw it in Game 7, you saw it throughout, after Game 4. The Panthers found something in what the Bruins were doing, especially on their breakouts. We've talked about this, and they just exposed them. I mean, you look at the way the Bruins unraveled look at just overtime alone. Bruins didn't show up. Like Jeremy Swayman was the guy in that overtime. And, it took the Panthers a while to score, but they finally do. Just a choke. Just a choke. And there's nothing else you can say. I mean, up 3-1 in the series, the way better team, chance to go play Toronto in the second round, and it's over. Just like that, Carl. Psst, over. And, that's it. That's it. I mean, the Florida put together the perfect game plan. They did. And the Bruins just couldn't match it at all. I mean, you saw some of those break. I mean, it really, from up above, from where I was seated, Florida really was a lot of times, especially later in the game, using that stretch pass a bit. I don't know if you saw this too.
Yeah.
And if the Panthers lost it, kind of putting the puck in the hands of the Bruins and trying to let them make a mistake, which they often did. And there it is. That's it.
Yeah. I think we had shared texts during the game, and I said, right, like, nerdy hockey take. The problem with the game tonight, and maybe for the series, was F2. Like, the second Bruins player on the forecheck was non-existent. Whether that was the game plan or not, they never put pressure on the Panthers' defense, really. Like, they were asking the first forward in on the forecheck to create the havoc, and they weren't skating tonight. And so you're talking about the stretch pass. So on the forecheck, their first D-man would hit their second D-man, and then what do the Panthers do best? Forecheck, right? Like that's what they do best. So they hit the stretch pass with no intent on catching the puck, but just putting it into the Bruins end and then getting after it, and being physical on the Bruins defenseman. So that, of all things, not recognizing that they had to put more pressure on the Florida Panthers defense on the forecheck, that certainly cost them tonight. Like, and when they did it at times, especially when the Bruins on the forecheck had that defenseman step down and pinch, they created havoc, right? Like I think they had the most zone time, at least going into overtime. I think at one point in the third period, it was 11 minutes of zone time for the Bruins and 8:38 or something like that for the Panthers. So they had the ability to sustain pressure, but they weren't forcing enough turnovers off the forecheck, which you had changed the game plan to put pucks in deep. Like that was what the Bruins had decided to do probably after game 2, right?
Yeah.
But in order to make that work, go all in. Like you have 4 lines of depth. Get after it and use them. And then that would be the other thing for me, right? Like 2 opportunities in overtime. The Panthers put out the 4th line, and so did you. And there was an opportunity there to put out your 3rd line, put out a 1st line, and try to get a matchup that was in your favor. Because that 4th line struggled a little bit tonight for the Bruins.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at the whole thing. I mean, we'll dive into this systematically as this show goes along, but just all that regular season, and it ends after round 1. No one saw it coming. Nobody did beforehand. I mean, if anyone had the Panthers in this series, they're lying. But I mean, every credit to the Panthers. The fact that they were able to put together a game plan that did what they did, that exposed the Bruins, that capitalized on chances, that, Sergei Bobrovsky stood tall, all those things. I mean, to me, it's, and even the Bruins had the lead with a minute left. The Panthers just stuck the knife in as best they could in the series, and you saw it, and the better team won. You said it. Better team won.
Yeah. I'd be interested. I am not up on Brandon Montour's contract, but if he's in a contract year, good for him. And here's my question to you, Evan. Did you know he went to UMass Amherst? I had no idea.
So I did know. I knew he did a year there. So he was, because before Cale, there were only a few really good NHLers that went to UMass. So Brandon Montour was one of those guys. The big question everybody has after this series, obviously, we'll get into Bruins, Panthers, and what went wrong. A lot went wrong, and we've talked a lot about it. Whether or not this is it for Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci. Now, I saw Bergeron, obviously, as everybody else did, embrace every player and look, teary-eyed and kind of saluted the crowd after the game. You wonder, we were a lot, most people thought last year was it for him. Now, this year is it. I mean, this year's over. Is this it? And I think that's going to be the big question going into next season is this it for Bergeron and Krejci? And it feels like, this season's had a last dance feel to it. And, I mean, I know Bergeron said he couldn't go out like he did last year, but this season was the perfect regular season. It was perfectly set up for them, on the Eastern side and everything in the playoffs. And it's it. Like, what do you think about that?
What do I think about the potential for Bergeron and Krejci leaving? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, and just the whole situation there.
So I think you always look at the information that people are providing, and you look at the way that Don Sweeney approached the year. They approached the year as all in. And Bergeron and Krejci, right, like that idea that they came back on smaller deals, even though I think there's 4.5 against the cap next year because of signing bonuses. They came back on small deals. Don Sweeney went out at the deadline to get Orlov and Bertuzzi and Hathaway to try to build a team that could win multiple ways, right? Like a team that could get up and go and play with the Toronto Maple Leafs, right? Like or the Lightning, and then with Hathaway and Orlov, like ideally a team that could match the physical style of the Florida Panthers. So I tend to believe that they think that this is Bergeron and Krejci's last year. Right, like Tom Brady, you can never anticipate the competitive fire of someone like those guys that have seen it all in the National Hockey League. But this is probably it for the two of them. And where does the team go from here? And right, they were 0-3. They were 0-3 with Patrice in the lineup, right? Like,
yeah.
That's not what I'm not saying his fault by any stretch of the imagination, but probably not the ideal way that he anticipated this being his last games, if it is his last games, and that is the one thing when he sits down with his family over the course of the next whatever it is, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, that's going to eat at him a little bit.
Yeah, I mean it absolutely it will, it totally will, and I just think it. 1 second, I'm just fixing something.
Yep.
I know I'm doing this live, but I am.
I just lost you. This is not what I anticipated either. Being alone on this podcast without Evan. So I'm going to answer some of your questions. Anything that you might have to throw my way would be ideal. So I'll try to look through this feed here and answer anything you have. Oh, Evan.
I am back. I am back here. Sorry, everybody. You got me, Carl? You got me?
Oh, Evan, I just started to sweat a little bit on this live podcast.
I want to apologize to everybody for that. I was not logged in under the correct login. I am under the right thing now. So that is all that matters. I'm sure that I will get roasted for this, as I should. So we are back. Sorry about that, everybody. I know I kind of unraveled like the Bruins there, which is unfortunate. So what were you talking about before I dipped? Oh, Bergeron and Krejci. What do you feel about them right now?
Yeah, I just think the one thing for Bergeron, especially, right, like 0-3 with him in the lineup, coming back there in Game 5. Someone as competitive as him, someone that has played at a very high level, obviously in the National Hockey League, internationally, won everything that you could possibly win. When he sits down in the next 2 days to talk with his family, that's something that's probably going to eat with them, and it'll probably make it a tougher decision whether to come back or not, right? I do think it probably is the end, just that the way that they approached the whole year, the way that they played him in the last game at Montreal, this was probably it for him.
Yeah, I mean, to think that this is it, like to go out like this, and it just hits at, feels like yet another playoff chance they have kind of fumbled away. Like this is a choke. Up 3-1 in the series. You should beat this team anyway. I mean, this should have been over in 5. It should have been over in Game 6. Should have been over multiple times. And they never could finish it. And it's unfortunate if this is it for Bergeron and Krejci, that this is the way that they go out. I mean, it's tough. I mean, it's tough for them. And I'm still in shock. Carl, as you can tell, I'm still in shock over this whole thing.
I think in shock for sure, just the way that the year went. But if you look at this team since 2018, 2019, like when they went on that Stanley Cup run against St. Louis, they were this team. Right? Like they're a team that plays high risk, that turns over a lot of pucks, both in the neutral zone and then like 5 feet inside the offensive blue line. They wanted to make plays. They wanted to create danger area chances, and Florida understood that. So if you look at, and they commented on it, at least Brick did a bunch on the broadcast tonight, the way that Florida Panthers backtracked, right? Like they were the Panthers defense were gonna hold the blue line no matter what, like giving their forwards enough time to come back into that area, and they stifled the Bruins at the offensive blue line. Were able to shorten the game, create those turnovers, and then do what they did best, which was put the Bruins under duress by forechecking in finish thing with every chance. Like the Bruins D just looked tired.
Oh my God, Carl, they looked gassed, especially in overtime. I mean, the Panthers were just all over them, especially the D. I mean, they were just smothered. And it's, as you said, it's incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's interesting, right? Like all the people out there that said like the clown act that Kachuk had. What was that, game 3? And then you look at him here. He was a catalyst for that team. The ability to play physical, the ability to play off the rush, the ability to play on the power play. Like, I hadn't seen enough of him play, right? Like it's just you don't get a lot of opportunities to watch the Florida Panthers play, but he is a star in the National Hockey League. You may not like the way that he carries himself, but he's a physical force with a ton of skill, and you don't get that combination all that much. And him and Bennett were problems. Montour was a problem.
Oh my God!
Like I saw one of the questions in the chat. What is the prediction for the Leafs and Panthers series? The Panthers are going to be a really hard matchup for, if they're capable of replicating this same game. Like I could see the Panthers and Leafs going game 7 as well. Like Toronto wants to get up and go. They want to play on the power play. They play with a ton of skill. They're thinner on the back end too, right? Like Morgan Riley is their best defenseman. So like the Leafs sitting at home watching that game tonight know exactly what the game plan for the Panthers are going to be. They know that they're going to put it in deep. They know they're coming after Morgan Riley. That's going to be a long series. And if I had to pick it right now, which I will, I think Florida in game 7, just because they wouldn't go away. They wouldn't quit, right? Like when it looked like it was over in game 6 after Boston came back 4-3, and when it looked like it was over tonight, they found a way. So they compete. They play good defense. They obviously not great goaltending, but they're heavy, and that's another matchup problem for Toronto.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. With this I want to kind of continue to dissect this Bruins series and loss, and I mean, I just go back to I'm very interested to hear Paul Maurice and the Panthers, because they found something. They honed in on something, and the other thing is, and this was talked about a lot on Twitter, and we talked about this after some games, Hampus Lindholm. It's funny, going into this series and going into this playoffs, we talked a lot about how the Bruins have, borderline 3 number 1 defensemen: Charlie McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm, Dmitry Orlov. And, McAvoy had his good and bad games. Orlov had his good and bad moments, but was really not great in his own zone. And Hampus Lindholm I just wasn't there. I'm shocked by that, because he looked so good in the regular season, and in the playoffs, it just wasn't. There wasn't that there. It just wasn't there. I mean, what did you see in his game? Because you saw in the first period whiffing on shots and failing to clear the puck, just little things like that. And it's like, you're basically a number 1. You're going to get Norris votes this year. I mean, I'm still baffled by it.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for his complete disappearance, right? Like, game plan completely just to be physical. The Bruins never were capable of being that second layer of attack. You saw and there was probably some tightness to his game, whether he's hurt or not, I don't know. But like you look at the Marchand play. I don't know if that was second period when he comes off the end wall and he tries to pass it into a space where he thought Lindholm would be, and Marchand kind of throws up his hands. He just had a tough series. I think tired. They came after him physically. and it was, yeah, he just never was able to get going. Like, and you could see in Game 6, right? Like the tightness, a play that he's probably made 1,000 times in his life, skating up, trying to put it off the glass into the neutral zone. And he throws it, 10 rows deep. Yeah, he wasn't at his best, but that was the whole Bruins team, right? The whole Bruins team struggled. Turnovers, defensive end. It was a really tough.
Oh, it's everybody. It wasn't just him. It was not just Lindholm. And I think it's gonna, and we can get into this right now. It's gonna cause a lot of second guessing of not just this series, but the end of the regular season. They went for the record. Obviously, some guys got rest. They get the record. They found all these ways to win in the regular season, and as you said, they looked gassed a lot of times during this playoff run or during this one series. And it's going to beg the question of should they have rested more? I know that they wanted momentum going into the playoffs. I think that's a valid thing to want, but they looked gassed. They didn't show up at times. There were a lot of times this season where they had some bad games, but they were bailed out by really good goaltending. They had that at parts this series. They didn't at others. I mean, again, Carl, the fact you texted me this, and I agreed with you, that third period was their best period of the game by far, and one of their best of the series. And then you come up for overtime and are basically outplayed for almost 10 minutes. Like, I don't know what happened. And I think Bruins fans feel the exact same way. And yes, the Panthers played, an outstanding game and were terrific on the forecheck and things like that. But I just, where did the 2022-23 Bruins go that were in the regular season? I mean, it unraveled. It could just completely unraveled.
Yeah. If you go back to kind of dissecting that chasing of the record and resting people, it's difficult, right? Because the same thing where we talked about the other night, like if you go with Swayman or you go with Ullmark, you're gonna get hit either way, right? Like if you're Jim Montgomery, and the same thing, right? Like if they had rested people, they come into the series and they play the way that they did right now, he'd be getting hammered for resting people and that you weren't getting playoff tested and you weren't playing with your full lineup, and then you chase a record and he's getting the same heat. Like I would have done what they did, which was rest people here and there, like one game at a time, chase that record because you're trying to get playoff tested. You're trying to play, like playoff hockey is playing with urgency, right? So when chasing that record, it gave them something to play for, right? As opposed to like, hey, we're first and we're just going to throw our sticks out here and play nonchalant. So I think I would have gone about it the same way, right? Like I think they tried to rest as many people as they could without putting their full lineup in from Providence. So I think they managed that pretty well. It doesn't look like it. It doesn't look like it now. And then where were they? I don't know. I mean, and the one thing is, and I know we keep talking about this, the bad matchup for them. They were outplayed in 6 out of 7 games. It wasn't like Boston outplayed Florida at stretches of time for 4 games, and you're like, oh, they were unlucky, right? Like that wasn't a reality. Like game 1 when they lost 3-1, I think we both came out of that saying, well, you got lucky, right?
Yeah.
Like the thought process, like everyone's sick, the Bruins will figure it out. But I think it was only the game 3 in Florida where you came away saying the Bruins were the better team over the course of that 60 minutes, and
that was the only time they showed any structure. That was the other thing, is like into the defensive zone, just no defensive structure. And I want to go to this. Connor Ryan just tweeted out. Again, I'm here with you guys. I'm not in the locker room or in the Montgomery presser. Montgomery mentions that he should not have split up Bergeron and Marchand to open Game 5. There's there's that. Ty Anderson from 98.5 The Sports Hub tweeted out, Swayman very emotional. He was asked about his emotions after this loss. Just kept asking next question. Let's get to that, because that was the big decision coming into Game 7. I think they actually got it right. I know they lost, so we can disagree. I think the real problem is Swayman should have come in earlier in this series, and that's hindsight. We were Team Olmark throughout. The typical thing is you ride one goalie. I think in hindsight, the tandem worked throughout the season. They abandoned it in the playoffs, and they lose in 7 games. And, we're going to look back at that and say, yep, they absolutely should have run the tandem. But, if we're just isolating Game 7, I didn't think Swayman was why you lost. I think Swayman was actually why you, what's the word? Floated for as long as you could in overtime. I just go back to Swayman should have been in earlier in this series. That's really my main take.
Yeah, and if we're playing the hindsight game, what game is that, right? Like,
that's the problem. It's hindsight.
Is it Game 3? Is it Game 3 where you came off a loss at home against the Panthers, going down there just to give your team kind of a spark because you had been outplayed for, the 120 minutes or 2 games there. So is that the game that you put him in? Because I don't think I would have done it Game 5, and this is the reason why, right? Like, you didn't want to be arrogant and take the game for granted.
Correct.
Right? Like, and Olmark had been, I think it was Game 4 where we got on live and I said, great job signing Olmark for 4 years at $20 million, Don Sweeney. Like,
had 41 saves in Game 4.
Yeah, he was that good. And so you wanted to put a team away so that Olmark then could get the rest. So, yeah, maybe hindsight, it's Game 6. You recognize that you have a goalie that's more than likely injured, more than likely tired. That's the game you go with them. And then clearly you had to go with him tonight just because he wasn't right on Friday night. So, yeah, I just don't know. Like, I guess for me, hindsight would have been Game 6 down in Florida.
Yeah, it felt like Game 6, or at least bring him in for Game 6 at some point in the game. I know Montgomery even mentioned he was contemplating a goaltending change in that Game 6, and they never did it. And, Olmark was giving up goals until the end. So, you can even make the argument that you should have, went to Swayman mid-game there. And I get it. Olmark's most likely going to win the Vezina. Olmark is good. But as we've said, he didn't look right. And we'll see, at breakup day, whenever that is, we'll see, obviously, what he ended up having or what his deal was. But, Game 7 alone, Swayman was one of your better players. I'm not going to sit here. I'm not going to sit here and put any of this on Swayman. It wasn't him.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Right. Like what you're looking for in any of those games is a big save to give you an opportunity to win. And overtime he makes 2. Right? He makes the breakaway save on Tkachuk, which
I thought that was it. That was it.
That would have been a fitting way for the season to end there because Tkachuk had been a thorn in your side since Game 1. And he was probably the best player in the series. And that's a huge save. And then they turn the puck over again. I think there's a tip there by Bennett, big save. So he gave you an opportunity to win. Your turnovers, your inability to manage the puck, your inability on the opposite end to create turnovers on your forecheck which lost you the series.
Completely.
That was a staggering thing. Even going into overtime of Game 7, where you knew you had to manage the puck, still turning the puck over far too much.
To me, Panthers played well in Game 7, for sure, 100%. But whatever happened in this game, and they obviously lost, the Bruins made their bed. The Bruins decided that, Game 5 they were going to have issues and hand the Panthers goals. They, decided in Game 6 they were going to play as bad as they did in their own zone and after they scored their own goals. And, you just handed the Panthers chances, and credit to the Panthers. They capitalized on them. So, I know we'll get into conversations later in the week, because I see some people saying, 65 wins for nothing. Right now, I mean, yeah, I mean, I like the regular season stuff. Brad Marchand said it all season. It doesn't matter what they do in the regular season. It matters, what happens come the postseason. Um, and nothing happened. They're out in round one. I still think as time goes along, we might look back and say, yeah, I mean, I think when we look back on this, when I look back at the 2013-14 Bruins, who were, a wagon President's Trophy team, I always look back and go, man, they should have got past the Canadians in round two. That's always my main takeaway. I think when we look back at this series, without a doubt, we will look back and go, I cannot believe that happened. And even like we haven't even touched on the first period and a half to 2 periods where they like didn't show up in this game. Like they're just lifeless. I mean, this building was lifeless. Panthers scored the first goal. Obviously, this team that scores first in every game has won the game. So that was in the back of everybody's mind. Then the Panthers come out in the second, immediately score. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe they didn't. It reminded me, I know this is going to piss people off, it reminded me of the Game 7 in 2019 against the Blues. Up until they came back, obviously up until they came back. Which I guess just like, what are you doing? I'm still just in shock about it,
Yeah, and it was what it was for the 7 games, just a lack of urgency all around the rink, right? Like especially that second goal, right? You turn over
Oh
the
my
puck,
God.
You turn over the puck with one hand on your stick. It comes back into the end. Right? Like you've seen the Panthers now for 6 games. Their defenseman has pinched on every pass, and you have two wingers blowing the zone. You lose that now puck battle on the right hand wall. It gets kicked back, and the player that lost that battle, there was no urgency to get back into the slot, and they're able to pass it, catch it on your backhand, give it to Sam Reinhart, and then you get a screen in front of Swayman. Like there was just no urgency around the rink until the third period, and then you got back up and they played really well in the third period, and then in overtime it was back to not stopping on pucks, turning it over, and forcing your goalie to make big saves.
And leaving Matthew Tkachuk open at center ice. You have a 4-on-2 going the other way, and everyone just kind of, oh, Matthew Tkachuk's back there. I mean, it's stunning. I mean, but it also isn't stunning. I know, like we sit here, stunned and all that, but like we predicted what we predicted in Game 7 because of the way they played in the regular season and the team that they showed that they were during the regular season. But I mean, if you go off the last 2 games, this isn't a surprise. By the way, only the second time all year the Bruins have lost 3 games in a row. The last time I think was end of January, Florida, Tampa, and Carolina all on the road. This obviously was, just Florida and between home and road. I mean, it's just, that it's happened. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think the stunning part is 2 things, right? Like a 65-win regular season, and then you have a 3-1 lead. But after Game 2, we were worried for a reason, and I will say we as collective Bruins fans, like you watched the 2 games at home, you realized that the Panthers were more than good enough to beat you, right? Like you put your foot down a little bit in Game 3 and 4, but I'd never, right? Like I'm just not surprised that the Panthers were capable of coming into the Garden and winning a Game 7. You're just surprised that you were up 3-1, but that you can't. Yeah, make no mistake about it. Again, the Panthers were the better team. They were the better team.
Yeah, I mean they absolutely were. I want to get to some other stuff, bigger picture. I know we touched on Bergeron and Krejci, and my connection went out midway, so I was kind of handling a bunch of stuff. So I want to give that justice. There's gonna be a lot of legacy talk in the next week or so, or months, honestly. There's a long rest of the playoffs, and the offseason is going to be much longer than we anticipated. But the legacy of guys like Bergeron and Krejci, and this has been a recurring theme of these cup chances just kind of slipping from their grasp. I'm not saying them. But teams they were on and prominent parts. I'm not saying it's their fault because it hasn't been. But like this was the opportunity. It felt like everything was headed their way. And, now you have this and you have other seasons. Obviously the bubble was kind of a weird one, so I have trouble putting that fully against them. It was a weird year. But even 2019, Cup in the building, Game 7, 2014, that team, even 2013, that was in the Cup. And it's like, my God, it's and they were such consistent winners. But, if this is it and that's only one Cup, it's tough. That's tough, especially, going out in the first round to Florida.
Yeah, but what are you going to say? From the sense if we're looking at them, Krejci and Bergeron, from the legacy of where they
incredible legacies, by the way, incredible legacies. I'm not I'm not saying that's everything, but it's there.
Yeah, no. Right, like what? So the Bruins fans, like you would ask them then, what do you think of Ray Bourque and Cam Neely? Right, like
that's a counter, yes.
Right, like the idea that those are the two best, possibly the two best Bruins of all time, right? That never were quite able to finish winning a Stanley Cup in their playing days. Ray Bourque's considered one of the best defensemen of all time, and Cam Neely might be the best power forward of all time. They were not able to win a Stanley Cup in Boston. That doesn't mean that their legacy is any less. I mean, they had sustained success for the most part from 08, 09, right? Like, and even 07, 08, they make that team coming off of Joe Thornton trade and going from Dave Lewis into Claude Julien. Like, they turned it around pretty quickly, in large part because you had Bergeron and Krejci down the middle, right? And you win a Stanley Cup in 11. You go back in 13. You go back in 19, and you were a consistent threat. Would you like to have won a second Stanley Cup? Would you not go out in the first round after having the best regular season of all time? Yes, but does that minimize the legacy of who David Krejci and Patrice Bergeron in the scheme of all-time Bruins? I don't think so. I don't think you have that success in that 14-year period if they're not around. I lost you again. Hope you're back. Now you're out.
I'm back in now. I'm back in. I'm back. I have to mute my mic. There's people working around me, so I kind of have to be quiet. I'm like on a hostage tape here. You're right, though. I mean, there's so much winning in the regular season, just not where you want it in the postseason. I'm seeing the comment section, by the way. Carl, we were saying before this series, we're like, it'd be really cool if the Bruins went on to play the Leafs in the second round because we get the Leafs fans interacting with us on here. They've arrived early, celebrating, obviously, going to the first round and the fact that they won't have to play the Bruins in the second round of the playoffs.
And it's great, right? Like, there is the best thing about the playoffs is anytime a Canadian team moves on, right? Like, there's no place that has more passion. Like, always a ton of fun. Like, as a player, when you used to cross over the Canadian border and you'd see, right? Like, you wake up in the morning here and you see ESPN and it's all sports, right? Mm-hmm. Except hockey. The second you cross over the border, TSN, the only thing you see is ice hockey. So for the playoffs, the NHL playoffs, to have Toronto in the second round, like, it's the best thing for the league. You just would have loved a matchup that was Toronto-Boston, not Toronto and Florida.
Yes, I think the NHL would have enjoyed a Bruins Maple Leaf series. I think so would we. Lineup changes in this game. Tyler Bertuzzi up with Marchand and Bergeron. I mean, I like the idea. Bertuzzi was their best forward in this series, most consistent producer. Um, put him with, your two stalwarts up front. Um, I mean, I don't again, I don't think that's why you lost. I think just defensively, it was just a breakdown from game 1 to 7. And that's the other thing is, as you said, like 1 through 4, games 1 through 4, when the Bruins were up 3-1, didn't feel like the Bruins had command of the series. The only reason I ever thought after when it was 3-1, I was like, oh, the Panthers look unraveled, is you look at the end of game 4, Kachuk with the, fighting Olmark and just the complete, just eruption. And you think, oh my God, this to come back to Boston. And I mean, complete credit to the Panthers for finding a way to somehow, push through that and get back into the series. I mean, no one expected it, would have been smart to go place a bet with our good friends over at FanDuel. Use FanDuel.com/Boston. $5 bet gets you $200 in bonus bets. Could have used that for this series. We made a lot of money on the Panthers. But I just, it's, and the other thing is obviously, the pressing of buttons. During the season, it felt like Montgomery pressed every button correct. Felt like every move he made worked. Felt like the hands-off player-coach approach worked. This series, I just, Montgomery mentioned after the game that he regretted taking Bergeron and Marchand away from each other prior to Game 5. It just felt like they got panicky with the lines and the pairings, even after Game 2. And we talked about this, but it just like they didn't embrace being the better team, right?
Yeah, I think if you look at the series and whether you talk about line combinations or D pairing, it's game 5, right? Like you had Bergeron in and the opportunity just to kind of insert him on that top line with DeBrusk and Marchand, what you had done all year. You didn't, and you completely changed at least 3 out of your 4 lines that night, and you didn't start. You were more than sluggish in the first 10 minutes of that game, right? Like you didn't have a shot for the first 10 minutes. And so that's the game that you would go back to and say, why so many changes? Right? Like you had a 3-1 lead. You had a lineup that could match the physicality of the Panthers, and you completely change it. So that would be the one area that you look at and you're like, what are you doing with the line combinations? And I would say the other night, too, game 6, seeing Forbort and Clifton struggle a little bit. Why didn't you separate them? Why didn't you get them away from the Bennett and Kachuk? That's the 2 areas. Game 5 and then that matchup the other night where Panthers they dominated that matchup all night.
Yeah. And even, starting tonight's game with Orlov and McAvoy together when they just haven't had success out of them. This other one, David Jen asked, do the Bruins still lose if Ullmark is in net? I think it's an interesting question. I know that, we've said that Swayman was not the reason for this loss. I don't think he was. But I want you, in an alternative universe, let's say Ullmark goes in this game and they lose, right? Ullmark goes in, they lose. He's clearly dealing with something. We're sitting here going, you have the healthy guy. Why didn't you try him? Whereas now we're, sitting here saying, no, you tried the healthy guy, came close to working, but the real problem was you didn't go to him earlier in the series. So, I mean, it was 1 goal. I don't know if that's enough to say that, Ullmark, healthy Ullmark, regular season Linus Ullmark. Yeah, probably they do. But clearly, he's been a different guy. With the health issues and such. So yeah, I don't think we can say for sure like, if Ullmark was in, they would have won that game. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think it makes a difference at the end of the day, right? Like, because regardless of the goalie that you put in, you have the same team playing in front of you that consistently mismanage the puck. And over the series, Ullmark had proved that he, outside of Game 4, right, he clearly wasn't healthy. And even in that Game 4, I think that Game 4 is when he makes that diving save, head save on Reinhart, right? Like, and he all series, right? Like instead of pushing off using his edges to get across the crease. Like, he often was laying down, diving, trying to make things happen. So he clearly wasn't right. So I would say no, it wouldn't have made a difference if Ullmark was in tonight. You still would have lost the game.
Yeah, the same issues plagued you, and I think the Bruins took the Panthers seriously. I don't think there's anything of like, oh, they were overlooking them, and nothing that they said would make me think that. But I'm fascinated, and we already kind of got a glimpse of what the Panthers did and were able to do. But I'm fascinated to see what comes out about what they saw. Kind of like a Derek Lawn type comment about Andrei Vasilevsky. Kind of like what they saw in their pre-scout, because it was a lot. And the way that they kind of dismantled the Bruins is, impressive. And we said, and even if the Bruins made past this series and got to, face Toronto would have had 7 games of film of how to beat the Bruins, basically handed to them. You don't even have to look that hard. Here's what they're doing. I'm surprised and I'm shocked about it. But, and I think going in, we both felt confident. I think a lot of people that I saw on Twitter felt confident about it, but it just nothing. There were just parts of that game where they were not in it, and the crowd was in it. The crowd was tensed up, but the crowd was in it, and I just wasn't there. I know we're getting more and more people coming in and people going in and out, so I want to kind of retool on some things that we've talked about. I think that it just felt like the Bruins handed the Panthers a lot of chances, and the biggest chance they gave them all was, let's put things down to 1 game, and that was it tonight. That was it.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's amazing, and credit to the Panthers, right, in using Montgomery's words, like catastrophic turnovers. Every turnover that the Bruins gave the Panthers capitalized on. They didn't miss. I can't think, maybe outside of the Tkachuk breakaway today off of a mismanaged 4-on-2 is the only time they didn't capitalize on a glaring turnover. Every other time, it was in the back of the net. So, the Panthers were dialed in. They knew exactly what their game plan was. They didn't, veer off of that. They went hard. They finished on their chances, and they were really physical all series.
Yeah. Also some news about Patrice Bergeron I'm just getting from Ty Anderson on Twitter. Patrice Bergeron has a herniated disc in his back. So he has a back injury that he was dealing with throughout that time. On his future, Bergeron says he'll take some time and talk with the family before making a decision on future. Quote, right now it's hard to process anything. It hurts right now. On talks with Krejci and Marchand before leaving the ice. It's always an honor to play with these guys. It's been over a decade. It's a special bond. On the salute to the fans after the game. It's a special city. It's a special fan base. It's a thank you for the support all year. So no surprise he's not committing to something on his future. The game just ended. I'm not expecting an answer on that anytime soon, especially after a game. But to know that he's playing through a herniated disc, everyone's dealing with something, but to play through that, that's not exactly easy. And, and the other thing is him and Krejci didn't play for parts of this series. Now, of course, the Bruins won games 3 and 4 without them. I don't know if having him in game 2 switches the series, but, clearly was dealing with something with his back. Bergeron was, obviously.
Yeah, and you've come to expect that from him, right? He's played through worse injuries, right, with the punctured lung there, and he's someone that competes. But that's the injury's not why the Bruins lost this series, right? You don't want
God, no.
Yeah,
no.
You don't want to put that out there in the sense that I think that'd be really unfair to the Panthers, in the sense that for 6 games they executed, or for 7 games even, they executed their game plan night in and night out, and they played with more energy. They managed the puck, and they capitalized on all their chances. So Yeah, like you say, I'm sure it'll come out when the Panthers, when their series ends somewhere along the line, and you'll hear about all their top players, right? Like Ekblad missed a game, like Montour, Stahl in and out there at times, and I don't think Bergeron would use that as an excuse of why they lost for sure, and I don't think you think that either. It's just
No, I agree with you. But yeah, I mean, I think we've hit on everything. I think we have covered it throughout. I mean, is there any other leftover thoughts from this series in Game 7 that we haven't touched on? It's been a lot. I want to know if we've missed anything.
I don't think that we've missed much. I think credit to the Florida Panthers, like you said, whatever it is that I think what they saw. They had a team that they could, if they were aggressive, that they could force into turnovers, and they were relentless on the forecheck. They didn't try to play in transition. They were overly physical with all the Boston defensemen, and that paid off in the end. Like, they made this a really long series for the Bruins, and credit to the Panthers for executing for 7 games.
The other thing is, I don't think this is not on the front office. I think there's going to be a lot of blame tossed around these next couple days. I don't think this is on the front office. I think it was Brad Marchand who said it best back at the deadline and said, they've given us the best possible team. They went out, they added Bertuzzi, Orlov, Hathaway, depth. Those were just pure depth pieces. And, you have depth at net. You had depth everywhere. You were built for a playoff run, and the Panthers just diced you up. But I don't put that on the front office. You want to put that on coaching, absolutely, no question there. But and the question obviously that we're going to get asked and we're going to talk about in the coming days and weeks is, would Bruce Cassidy have been better equipped for that? That's a big question that it's, we're still fresh here. I think Bruce Cassidy, has a better playoff track record. Do they have that regular season? Probably not, but I don't think people care about the regular season right now, Carl, and they shouldn't. But yeah, I mean, it's gonna be interesting couple of weeks, interesting couple of months. What's going to be happening around this team?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of conversation until you step back on the ice in October, right? To have this kind of series to have the regular season, then to have the series first round lose in overtime. Like, Boston fans love hockey. They love the Bruins. They're not going to be happy until they get some answers and until this team steps back on the ice and proves in a first round that they can win, right? Like, that's what Boston fans want to see. So
the one last thing I want to add is when the Lightning lost in the first round, they got swept in 2019. That whole crew was coming back. It was still kind of early in that core. I know they'd went to the Cup in 2015, but it was still kind of early, and everybody was coming back. Stamkos, Hedman, Kucherov, the group. There's a good chance, as we've talked about, Bergeron and Krejci could very well be done. So they're your two top centers gone. You don't have much cap space, so you can't add a lot there. So, for the core pieces of Pastrnak, McAvoy, Swayman, Ullmark, Lindholm, others, this will stick with them. And maybe they go on a run in future years, but, is it the same? I mean, obviously a run is a run, but to do it with Bergeron and Krejci, to do it without them, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, you still have the pieces to make a run. Like, obviously, what do you do on those first two center spots? Like, Zacha moves in and had a nice series playing with Pastrnak. But with Hall, Lindholm, Swayman, Ullmark, like, you're going to have to there's somewhere in there you're going to have to make a trade. And which one of those pieces? And you've got to have a decent amount of of salary to make it work to keep Bertuzzi? Because coming out of this series, this is probably the one guy that you really want to keep. So how do you navigate that where you have someone his age that's capable of playing top 6 minutes, that plays a Bruin style of game? You've got to figure out a way to keep him so that you stay in that, you stay relevant, you make the playoffs, and you're capable, right? Like once you get in, like Matthew Tkachuk said, right, like you just want to get in and then you get a chance. And I think that's the one thing going into the summer. How do you figure out a way to keep Tyler Bertuzzi?
That's a huge one. That's a big one. And we'll be talking about that a ton over the next couple of weeks. Picking this apart, what happened, what went wrong, what could have fixed all of this. But Carl, this has been fun. I thought we'd have more of these. We only have 6 together because we didn't do game 1. But thank you for hopping on, and thank you to the viewers and the commenters and being engaged and watching these. We really appreciate it. And thanks for all the support this year. And that's it. Bruins lose Game 7, 4-3 in overtime. We will see you later this week.